Online for today's event. So again, thank you for your interest in this topic. I'm going to just highlight, many of you, I assume, know who DVRPC is. For those of you who do not, we are the federally mandated metropolitan planning organization for the bi-state region of Southern New Jersey and the 5 counties on the Pennsylvania side. Like I said, we cover 2 states, 9 counties, and 350 local jurisdictions. So that's a pretty large area for us to plan for. Our goal is to make sure that our region is growing in a sustainable way, and we do that through several mechanisms. First is our long-range plan, Connections 2045. We have a capital program called the TIP that funnels transportation investments for our region. And we also facilitate the regional comprehensive economic development strategy, which fulfills our obligation to the Economic Development Administration as the economic development district for the region. So those are our primary products. And then we do a whole lot of stuff in between there, from transportation planning to bike and ped planning to planning for climate impacts, economic development, housing, land use. So with that said, I want to encourage you all, because I have a captive audience, to please peruse our lobby for some of our products, some of the work we do. I encourage you to check our website out for many other forums and opportunities for you to get involved in our work. We appreciate your support. We appreciate your involvement. And again, thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean McGill-Legendre, who is going to talk about a few logistics, and enjoy the morning. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sean McGill-Legendre. As Karen said, I'm manager of the Regional Trails Program here at DVRPC. Yeah, I have a couple of housekeeping things to go over before we get started. As you might be able to see from your seat, KYW is in the room and recording today's event. Mike, if you could just wave your hand, people know who you are, that'd be great. DVRPC is also recording today's event, and it is being broadcast on Zoom to folks that are joining us online. If you haven't picked up an agenda or a list of biographies, those are out front on the tables. Please do grab one so you can read more about the speakers that we have today. Today's event is approved for AICP credit. If you intend to claim credit or want to provide feedback on the event, please fill out an evaluation forms. Those are also on the table out front. Today's event is 2.5 hours long. We will have a 15-minute break about halfway through, and then later a lunch generously provided by the William Penn Foundation. If you need to step out, though, to use the restroom or refresh your coffee, please feel free to do so. Coffee will be available as long as supplies last. Water is located, though, on the opposite side of the anteroom, closest to the end of the hall, near the big DVRPC logo. There's also a phone room on this side that you can close the door on if you need to make a private call. Restrooms, including an all-gender restroom, are available on either side of the elevator bank. If there is an emergency, then please follow any verbal instructions given via the building's alarm system. If we need to evacuate the building for any reason, the assembly point is Franklin Square across Ray Street. On the tables in front of you, you'll find a brief survey. We're planners, we love surveys. Just about your interest in this topic, what brought you here today. Please fill that out. You can leave it right on the table. You can fill it out during the event today. That'll really help us shape our approach to this topic forward and figure out what programming tools and projects that DVRPC can embark on in the future. When posing a question today to the presenter or panelists, please try your best to speak into one of the microphones. There should be one on each table. If there isn't one close by to you, though, don't worry, we'll repeat the question from the podium for the benefit of our online listeners. With all that out of the way, before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the folks joining both in person and online today, and ask you some quick questions. Participating today are not only many of our regional partners, but also folks from northern and central New Jersey, central Pennsylvania, Atlanta, Baltimore, Boston, California, Oregon, Utah, and Canada. There's representation from the private sector, the public sector, nonprofits, workforce development groups, advocates, community leaders, and educators. So as you can see, there's a lot of people in the room, and I think a lot of foundation for good conversation. For those of you in the room, I'm going to take a quick poll now. Can you raise your hand if you work for a government office or agency? A nonprofit? A community group? Academia? And if there's any groups I missed, just politely voice them out. Elected officials. Any other groups? Consultants. Now, different question, though again by a raise of hands. Who here has used an e-micromobility device before? Who here has seen an e-micromobility device? Who wants to know what are we talking about when we say e-micromobility? Great. That's actually a perfect jumping off point for our first speaker. Jean Crowther is a principal at Alta Planning and Design, where she leads Alta's Innovative Mobility Group. Jean is a national leader in micromobility, having led bike share plans and studies since the first program launched in the US. We're excited to have Jean join us this morning to help us wrap our heads around this topic, these new modes and their implications for trail and facility design. Jean?
All right, let's test this out. Okay. Good morning. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. As Sean said, I'm Jean Crowther. I'm a principal and an AICP planner at Alta Planning and Design. And Alta is a firm that specializes in sustainable transportation that supports healthy, thriving, active communities. And I personally have a history of focusing on active transportation, bicycle, pedestrian, and trail planning as part of multimodal transportation systems. And in the last 7 years, I've further specialized in that realm to focus really on new and emerging trends in transportation, mobility services, transportation technology, and to do that specifically through the lens of people-centered community planning and people-centered transportation. How do these new developments, how do these new investments, how do these new trends and changes in behavior fit within communities that are trying to achieve goals and trying to help people get where they need to go? With that focus in the last 7 years on innovative mobility, I've had the chance to continue working on shared micromobility specifically. As Sean mentioned, I have been doing this for 14 years since bike share first came to the US. And I got the chance to make this really colorful map of all the places that I've worked on shared micromobility projects, which was fun. But over those 14 years, I've not only gotten to work in all different contexts, communities of all different sizes, but also through the evolution that we've seen of bike share and scooter share in those last 14 years. The landscape has changed dramatically, and also have recently worked on some national guidance through the National Association of City Transportation Officials and their working papers last year, as well as a national guidance underway now for Canada that will be releasing soon. And beyond that focus on shared micromobility that I've had, I also come from a trail planning background. So before I even joined Alta, I worked at the Austin Parks Foundation in Austin, Texas, working on parks and trails, then worked for a nonprofit in South Carolina, working to build a Mountains to Sea trail. So what we're talking about today, next generation trails, really is the marriage of the two very specialized worlds that I've lived in. And so I really love the chance to talk about this. I did want to mention up front that what I'm going to share today in terms of some of the framing and some of the concepts and strategies is really rooted in these two primary resources. There are other resources that we'll talk about, but I wanted to share that in case you want to look further and further elaboration on some of what we'll talk about today. They're both available online. So what are we going to talk about? For my piece this morning, I want to start off by defining micromobility, making sure that we all have the same picture in our head of what we're talking about as we consider strategies. And also want to talk about why we're even here discussing it. Why now? Why does this matter? What are the implications? What's the context that the information you're getting today, how will it be useful when you leave this room? And then lastly, we'll talk about what now that we've got this shared understanding of e-micromobility, what are some strategies? What are some new thinking that you can apply to your work leaving here today? So to start off, micromobility is a relatively new term, at least being commonly used, and it's being used globally. This is not just a US or North American trend. And the short, succinct definition I have here is that it's small, fully or partially human-powered vehicles. And this is generally the understanding for anyone who's talking about micromobility in the transportation sector. Some may use the terms lightweight or low speed as part of the definition, but it's getting to that same idea of kind of a person-sized way to get around that is at least partially human-powered. And then e-micromobility is one type of micromobility that, of course, is electric powered. So just referring to that particular type of it. There are other forms of powered micromobility that may not be electric powered, but we're focusing on e-micromobility, which is the most common form and what you may be encountering on your trails or your shared use path networks in your community. To dig a little bit deeper into this definition of micromobility, the International Transport Forum in 2020 came out with a report on safe micromobility and really did a nice job of thinking through micromobility classifications in terms of weight and speed. And that is helpful in thinking further, not just about criteria of what do we call micromobility and what is not micromobility. It starts to set some thresholds of weight and speed, but it's also helpful as we move further along in this process of finding the right way to regulate and right policy and law that is defining these vehicles. We also, as many of you may be familiar with, we have a more commonly understood, more broadly accepted classification for electric bikes specifically. So there's generally an understanding of 3 classes of electric bicycles. And the main differentiator here are the max speeds at which you receive assistance, motorized assistance when riding it. So class 1, if you're pedaling, you're getting an electric assist boost up to 20 miles per hour. If it's class 2, you're pedaling, you get an electric assist boost up to 20 miles per hour, and you may also be able to throttle to get that boost up to 20 miles per hour. And then class 3 is when the speed jumps up to 28 miles per hour. These bikes are required to have a speedometer. And the trend we're seeing currently and the guidance from People for Bikes, if you follow that organization, they're doing a great job of cataloging e-bike policy. The trend is that usually class 3 is managed differently than class 1 and 2. And class 1 and 2 are generally accepted on streets and networks. So to get back to the International Transport Forum's thinking on micromobility, this was their updated report just released last year called Towards the Light, Effective Light Mobility Policies in Cities. And again, this is a global perspective, but I really appreciated this graphic. We modified it a little to make it a little easier to read from PowerPoint. But what I like about this is it does a nice job of showing that there is a big universe of new vehicles and devices that are out getting people where they need to go on any given day. And this looks beyond just micromobility to a full landscape of light mobility. So kind of making a broader tent there of what's included. And this also helps you understand that active transportation, the area that I've historically worked, there's a spectrum from that to what they're calling passive transportation. And micromobility straddles those 2 types of moving. There's the human-powered, the active version, But then there's also e-micromobility that's helping you move with motorized power behind it. But it's not the full spectrum of car-like vehicles that are operating differently than an e-bike might operate. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense of some of the current thinking. There is a lot of nuance here, and I think that's important to understand as any of you, in your agencies or the organizations you work with, think about how to manage and how to design for these different devices. We do have to kind of grapple with the fact that we need to come up with good ways to categorize and to account for these different versions. And so what we're focusing on today is really how to get all of these users to safely and comfortably share space where it makes sense for these users to be. So if we think about the broader context of the conversation today, I want to talk a little bit about why it's so timely and important for us all to be kind of thinking about and staying current with this new trend. Many of you may have seen that the headlines about e-bikes outpacing the sales of electric vehicles in the US, which is a wonderful headline. It's really exciting. But also it just shows you the huge popularity and people's access to e-bikes. And it is definitely on an upward trend. And we've also seen that there's actually research that came out in 2020 showing that people who buy e-bikes generally double their bike usage just from owning an e-bike. So you need to think not only about the popularity of the e-bikes themselves, but what does that mean for the frequency of trips and the ridership that's out there? We also know that shared micromobility, so shared fleets like bike share and scooter share that are offered in communities for people to access and use for one-way trips, shared micromobility systems are going to continue to help propel this trend. They're helping to sustain this trend of people having access to e-bikes and e-scooters. And I'll point out here, this is from NACTO, their annual report they do on ridership. And this is for the US and Canada. But I did want to note that, bike share in particular, the two darker colors in the bottom of the chart, have exceeded their pre-pandemic levels of ridership. So not only do we know that there's popularity, but we also know that there's some resilience and staying power with these modes in terms of how people get around cities. And this is actually a tidbit that I borrowed from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in the Bay Area. We worked with them last year on a similar issue as what we're talking about today. And I'm sharing this because I find it very compelling. When they looked at their ridership data of the 22 different transit operators they have operating in their large Bay Area region, Bay Wheels, their bike share program, is the 8th largest transit operator by ridership numbers. Which, if nothing else, maybe it's surprising, but if nothing else, it tells you that it is getting people where they need to go at a large scale. And that really gives you a sense of the potential for micromobility to really be an essential and kind of daily part of transportation systems, and the need to really think thoughtfully about how we manage them on our full infrastructure networks. And so beyond just the fact that they're popular and they're out here and people are using them, we also know that when people are using e-micromobility modes of transportation, there are other benefits that we can gain from this. It may be access to equitable and affordable transportation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the case where these modes are replacing car trips, expanding the number and the demographic of people who can afford, who choose to travel by active transportation or a mode other than the car. So really kind of making the tent wider, who is interested in and feels like they can take part in these micromobility modes. And then also improving health outcomes. And I want to take just a minute before we get into thinking about managing and designing for micromobility users on trails and talk about some of the perceptions that exist. And we're calling them myths just because it's an area where people have very appropriate concerns. People who are using trails are experiencing change and we're all trying to kind of process what's the right way to approach this, to have a safe, healthy, and thriving trail network, and to also support people who are getting where they need to go. So myth number one is the idea that people who are already trail users, your kind of classic design user for your trail network or shared use path network, doesn't want to share the trail with new users. That they want it to stay the way it is. It already feels crowded. They don't want new users or new types of users. But what we've actually found from communities who have surveyed users is that when asked how they'd like to handle it, people would rather there be a focus on etiquette and giving people the skills and the knowledge of how to share it safely, rather than prohibiting or limiting who can actually access that trail. The second perception is that e-powered users are going too fast to be on trails, that it's just not appropriate and the speeds are not compatible. And there certainly is the reality that there is the capacity for higher speeds when you have an e-powered motor. That's certainly there. But what we found from actual observational studies in communities that have done this is that e-bike riders are actually not going at significantly higher speeds than bicyclists. And in some cases, we're actually measured at going lower speeds than traditional bicyclists. So it's just one of those things where we need to continue to collect data and make sure we actually know what's happening on the trails as we think about designing for speeds and who fits where. Number three is that e-powered users are reckless, that they're new to this, or they don't know how they're supposed to operate, or they're just on an e-bike because it's fast and fun. So they're just going to take advantage of that. And what we've actually found from communities that have, again, done this observational study is that e-bike riders tend to be actually more courteous and more in line with trail etiquette practices than traditional bike users. And that is not to make it sound like traditional bike users are the bad guys, but just to acknowledge that there might be a perception that is based on the fact of e-bikes having the capacity for speed, but isn't playing out in reality. And also, I would imagine this is related to that fact that e-bikes are drawing a different demographic. It's people who are not necessarily the strong and fearless cyclists who brazenly go, whatever speed they need to go to get their workout in. These are people who are so excited to have an option that they feel comfortable and safe using to get out on trail networks. And number four is e-powered devices are causing more and worse crashes on trails. And this is certainly a very important area of concern. And we've heard this concern in communities all over the country. It is not just limited to one place. But what we have found is just simply at this point, there isn't enough data to point to whether that is true or not. And that's an area where we can all work in making sure that we're collecting good data and understanding what's involved and who's involved when they occur on trail networks. It does mean, though, that there's nothing at this point that's pointing to a trend of more or more severe crashes. Okay, so what now? That is some context of what micromobility is and why it is such a timely issue right now. What do we do with that information? We've broken this down into three different categories of approaches, three different kind of ways of thinking about what you can do next. And they are not mutually exclusive. You're probably going to want to do a both and, some kind of combination of this as you or your organization figures out your approach. But the first is thinking about overarching principles. And this may seem obvious, but it's an important step to make sure you're thinking about the adopted goals in your community, the goals of your trail system, if they have been adopted already. What is the trail system intended to achieve? What does a healthy trail system in your community look like? And then also, who does the trail serve? That's an important thing to know before you go any step further in thinking about management decisions or changes to policy or changes to design. Also, trail policy and management is an approach that focuses on the rules that you set, who, what, when, where, and how, and can also address education and etiquette. And then trail design is the third bucket. And really, the idea here is just to design for the activity that you want on your trail network or shared use path. And that may seem obvious, but it's one of those things that really you have to take some thought into what do we want the behavior to be, and then how do we make that intuitive in the way that we design our facilities. So we'll go through each of these different buckets. Principles to guide decision making. This is a framework that came out of us working with communities across the country on their trails and grappling with lots of different types of mixes of users. And rather than come up with some one size fits all approach or a set of rules of how to do this, this is intended to be kind of 6 overarching principles that anyone could use, almost like a checklist or a lens to look through when you're trying to figure out how to make a management change or a policy change or a design change to meet a certain outcome. It's trying to just look more comprehensively instead of, and get past any tendency to be reactive or respond to an issue in a silo. So the first is advanced mobility justice. And this is just the basic concept that your trail and path network is ultimately part of your community infrastructure and your community transportation system. And if you're making changes to who can access it or when they can access it, you need to be conscious of who may be left out, who may be left behind, who may lose access to affordable, sustainable transportation, who may lose access to other services or getting to destinations, or just may lose access to an opportunity for health and quality of life. So thinking about the who and how any decisions that you make would trickle down to affect a group is just step number 1. Make sure you know who that group is. Second is design for safety. Again, hopefully this will be at the top of everyone's list, but critical to make sure that you're filtering through that lens. And this is safety for all users, and it's going to be a little bit different depending on the mix that you may have using your trail facility. But you need to be designing for safety and ensuring that the most vulnerable user that's going to be using your facility is taken into account. The third is complementing the natural environment. So this is recognizing the really unique place that trails have in our community infrastructure. They are more than just a roadway that you drive down. They really, in many cases, are connecting people to areas of the built environment they wouldn't otherwise be able to get to, or areas in the natural environment that are really special and that need to be accounted for. And this is here because you don't want to lose that. There's no reason to lose that by making a management decision that maybe overextends in who you allow on your trail. You need to find the right balance that is recognizing that element of your trail and working to ensure people can still enjoy that. The fourth is prioritizing the human experience. This is another one that's really touching on the unique place that trails and paths serve in our communities. People get very attached to their local trails. I'm sure you probably all know this. And it can be a really important part of people's lives, regardless of the reason that they're using it or the reason that they're on it. And that's something to account for, is to think about people's comfort on the trail and, to the extent possible, try to maintain that human experience while also managing for new uses and new users. The fifth is to expand user amenities. So if you are seeing a change or enabling a change in the users on your trail system, what does that mean for the amenities that may help serve that group? Could it be that you need to also be thinking about providing charging points for e-powered vehicles? Could it be there's a need for public Wi-Fi to help support transactions for shared micromobility? Could it be different parking or more bike parking? What is it that'll help ensure that it's a successful, thriving trail system for all of users who are allowed on it? And then sixth is design for the future trail. So as we have seen these trends that we mentioned earlier, the increase in popularity, a broader demographic of users, all of these trends point to the fact that we can't continue to design trails in the way that we might have 30 years ago. We have to be thinking about what's happening now and also where these trends are pointing for the future. So to the extent possible, prioritizing counts, understanding how many people are using your trail, looking into the future and thinking about how that's going to grow based on the trends that we're seeing now, and to the best of your ability, designing for that future use so that you're maintaining this shared safe experience. So again, this is just a framework for helping to think through decision-making, whether it's at the policy management or design level. And then to move into the last two categories of approaches, that was setting principles. We'll talk a little bit about policy and management considerations. So a couple of different approaches here. One, thinking about trail classifications. The second is user behavior. And the third is user types and devices. For trail classifications, this is really just the opportunity to tap into an existing structure that's often used to manage trail systems. So communities often already have identified what may be a recreational trail or have a trail classification based on surface type. This is an opportunity to take a trail classification and use it as a structure for thinking about how e-micromobility can best fit into the variety of trail segments or trail types that may exist in your community. So recognizing that you don't necessarily have to start from scratch, you can think about the elements of the trail classification, what surface type, how it's managed for use, and what the design use is, and then think about policies or management strategies that are different for each of those classifications and help support e-micromobility access in a way that's appropriate for that specific type. For user behavior, the idea here is to really focus on the behavior or the concern that you want to work to improve. There is a tendency to, especially when there's new devices or new vehicles that have entered an arena, to focus on the device or the vehicle itself. But ultimately, if you can focus on what the concern is and what the behavior is, you have an opportunity to really focus policy and management on that. And even education and etiquette. A lot of times people really just want to know what is the right way or know what is the best way to operate on a trail. And you can work towards that rather than focusing on the device. Examples would be a speed limit that applies to all devices, not just e-bikes, or parking that is helping to ensure that e-scooters are being parked off of a trail and not interfering with where people are going to be walking or biking. So thinking about the behavior and not the device itself. Just to look quickly at some examples around the country and how this has played out. And studies in Vancouver, BC and Fort Collins, Colorado. These were two examples where we found that e-bike riders were actually not traveling at significantly faster speeds than traditional bicyclists. So it brings to mind that element of, if you are going to manage for speed, just have a good sense of what's actually happening on your trail, who is actually speeding, or how you can manage for that rather than making assumptions. Also, case studies around the country show that there is generally good compliance with speed limits. So it's a management strategy that generally works. Again, if you give the information, people often want to be doing what is the best, operating in the best way for any given trail. So these case studies, and we've got links if you want to find out more about each of these, but these give that sense that people are generally following the rules. And then lastly, just, recognizing again that e-bike riders often are following trail etiquette and behaving courteously when using it. It's this idea that if you do empower people and give them the knowledge of how to do it safely, they will generally take advantage of that. So shifting to user types and devices, in cases where there are unique concerns that need to be addressed specifically by the type or the device. You can acknowledge that every user of a trail has their own needs and demands. Doesn't mean one is good and one is bad, but you can acknowledge that they are each unique. A pedestrian is going to have different needs and demands than an e-scooter rider. So acknowledging that, using signage and messaging to help give a message to exactly who needs to hear it. If it's e-scooter users who have been leaving scooters laying on a trail, use messaging and signage to help ensure that they understand what the proper approach is. And also, there is the option of trail policy that does prohibit certain users based on the type or device. I'll say this often is the one solution that everyone immediately goes to if there's a concern. And what we hope you're hearing today is that there's at least a lens to look through before choosing to prohibit a certain device just based on the device. There's a lot of nuance and a lot of ways to really structure it to ensure that you're not unnecessarily removing access for a certain group. And just one quick case study in Atlanta, Georgia, the Beltline did do a reduced speed zone just for e-scooters, just during congested periods of activity as kind of a test run. And through that process, they did find that there were fewer complaints about the behavior of e-scooters by imposing that speed limit during the most congested times, and some mixed results from the e-scooter companies on how they felt about it. But an interesting case study in terms of focusing on the device and also a specific place and time. Okay, lastly, if we look at design considerations, we know that for trail design, trail width, surface type, and adjacent space, kind of what's going on around the trail corridor, really sets the tone for how people operate and how people behave in that trail corridor and what they're expecting while they're there. And whoever the users are that you have allowed or at least not disallowed and that you expect to be on a corridor, this really should be informing design and thinking about the unique needs of each user type on that corridor. Safe operating widths is one critical consideration, and this is the same for traditional bicyclists, but also the NACTO guide, Designing for Small Things with Wheels, does a nice job of talking through beyond just traditional bicycles, how this changes with e-powered bikes, and also how it changes with larger cargo bikes in different shape than link bikes. So thinking about riding space, passing space, and shy distance to any vertical elements. You also can consider when to separate users to create a better experience for each user type. And this can vary depending on the volumes on your trail corridor, but there are different ways to think about when it's the right thing to do or how to do it. So you can separate by user type, pedestrians and joggers here, bikes and scooters there, or you can separate by speed, fast riders and e-powered here and slow walkers here. Or also you can build in a layer of separating by experience, or really giving a safe, comfortable space for a beginner cyclist or kids that's distinct from space that's for higher speed or e-bikes or higher speed pedal bikes. So thinking about that, and that'll vary depending again on the amount of activity you're getting on a corridor and what space you have to work with. And other design considerations beyond the trail network, which has been our focus today, trails and shared use path network in a community, you of course also need to be thinking about what happens when they're getting to the trail or leaving, and how to ensure that there's a safe and continuous experience. Thinking about intersections and driveways that are safe and maneuverable for this wider range of devices. Providing smooth surfaces, which can be really important for small wheeled, like scooters, to create a safe experience for them. And also just making the best place to ride obvious to the extent that you can. Again, designing for the activity you want. Use signage, pavement markings, and a continuous network to help steer people to the place where they're going to have a safe and comfortable experience. With that, these two resources again are available, And this PowerPoint will be available with additional links if you want to look further. And I really appreciate you listening today. I'm very excited to hear the next phase of the conversation this morning.
Right. Thank you, Jean. We do have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So if you do have a question, in the room, please raise your hand. Online, for the room, raise your hand and we'll call on you. Yes, great.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I like the presentation about the e-bikes. My question is, with the ongoing increase of e-bikes in the past few years, and more stations are growing, I suppose, has there been any regulation or law have there been any regulation or law requiring riders with e-bikes wear a helmet?
I can't point to a specific new law requiring as a result of e-bikes. That is certainly an important part of it. And I know for e-scooters in particular, it's been documented much lower rates of helmet use just across the board. I think I'll just speak from the broader perspective that at higher speeds, helmets are more and more important. Absolutely. There is a consideration for biking in general that helmet requirements can, in some cases, limit people's willingness or ability to bike. So it has to be done with careful thought and every effort made to ensure that it's not limiting people's ability to get out and ride. I hesitate to say it because I'm not 100% sure, but Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, a small community outside of Charleston, did just go through a process of updating their code of ordinance in response to an e-bike incident where a dog, there was a fatality of a dog. And it, it's an important issue and a really wonderful trail network in the community that's continuing to grow. And I do think that there was a helmet requirement for e-bike riders that came into play there. Does that answer?
I guess as a follow-up to that, there was legislation in Pennsylvania, I think it was in 2020, that was proposed. One, it would have formalized the classification of e-bikes in Pennsylvania to the class 1, 2, 3 that a lot of states are formalizing across the country. But the one of the stipulations that were going to be in that, because right now, in Pennsylvania, anyone under the age of 16 cannot legally ride an e-bike. This legislation was going to update that to allow kids under the age of 16 to ride an e-bike, but it would require them to wear a helmet.
Great.
Yeah, I guess what are your thoughts on, like, I know you mentioned like removing dockless micromobility kind of like last case scenario, but like communities that have dock and dockless. I know Paris recently the residents voted to remove all dockless bikes from their city. So like where do you find the balance in that with like communities being concerned about parking, but they still have actually dock bikes here?
So just to repeat the question, hopefully I paraphrase it right. It was a question about basically different approaches and potentially removing dockless bikes, leaving the docked ones in place. Basically, I guess a question about approaches to that sort of nuanced approach to types of users.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll just say, first off, the goal would be to ensure that there's access to, transportation options. So whether it's a docked bike share, or a dockless, there's a lot of factors that go into choosing that, but ultimately, having one or the other is better than none. And with dockless, there are a lot of strategies that can be applied to set up better parking to encourage and invite that better parking behavior so that there are not some of the issues that have been experienced in communities. But dock systems are great too. I don't think you have to do one or the other. It depends on the type of system you want, the infrastructure you have, and the space that you have available in your sidewalk and right of way. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I think I would just say again, the idea is just to make sure people have access to transportation options. So choosing between dockless and dock is different than choosing between whether to allow e-scooters at all onto a trail network or to prohibit them, right?
Right up front here.
Do you have thoughts, I think from this in the beginning of the presentation, or and discussed at all designing for like a more urban or suburban environment and the incorporation of some of these last mile devices? Because I'm talking about in South Jersey where we have some of these dense communities where it's just a struggle to bring up questions of multimodal design in general. In some of these communities that are very heavily traveled, big commercial corridors are car dominant, a lot of curb cuts, a lot of parking in front of stores and things like that. Do you have thoughts on that? And if it's relevant, is there guidance for how to interact with state and federal level governments when we need to try and get some of this work done for some of these areas? Like $8 million is going to go into 168 between Camden and Mount Ephraim now. And part of the things that are in there are like, Blue Street, road diet, stuff like that. We're seeing more and more people using scooters in and amongst regular vehicles and just last mile commute, daily commute kind of stuff. So I guess I'm curious if you have thoughts on designing for that environment or how you get them involved on some of the bigger roadways that other vehicles travel.
Yeah, so just to paraphrase the question for folks online, the question was basically about approaches you might take in more of a suburban environment or a commercial district type of environment. And in addition to that, questions about how to interact with the agencies that may be controlling roadways and facilities in that area, such as federal roadways or state roadways, or in New Jersey, county roadways.
That's a great question. And I'll just start by saying you have to make space for other road users, right? You have to build the infrastructure, and having a shared, or a dockless e-scooter program where everyone's riding it on the sidewalk is not a solution. But also forcing people who want to be riding an e-scooter onto arterials that have speed limit over 35 miles per hour is also not a solution. Ultimately, you do have to build the infrastructure, and for all those who are trying to build it and asking for it, the data is there. People want, even more than it ever was before, people want to have these options. They're buying e-bikes. They want to have a place to use them. And there's also a lot of data on e-bike and e-scooter users having a preference for bike facilities or off-street shared use path facilities, which, makes sense. But there, we also have data that shows that. And so in those contexts, in some of those types of environments, shared use paths have been developed and become the kind of critical network. And so focusing design and management on there to allow for as many of these users as you can, because they're trying to get places and they need to, have a connected network to do that. If you're working to build it on street, build out the network on street. We're in a phase of new modern urban bikeway design that is also suburban bikeway design. Our roads have gotten bigger, our speeds have gotten higher, and we need higher order bike facilities if people are going to have transportation choice. So, I'll just say that there's no other way, but you have to make space for these users if you want them out there using it safely.
You mentioned designing for amenities for micromobility, including Wi-Fi and charging infrastructure specifically. I was hoping to see in your debunking the myth section that charging infrastructure automatically leads to fire or device fire. But since it wasn't in that section, I guess, do you have any data specifically around charging infrastructure and how often or how infrequently that actually is?
That's really interesting. That hasn't come up in conversations we've had around the country of concerns. But I could certainly see that there could be a concern there. I'll just say first and foremost that we're not talking electric vehicle charging level infrastructure. This is e-bike and e-scooter charging, which is at a different scale. And also I did just recently, there's been debunking the myth. There was actually a headline saying that e-bike batteries were now a leading cause of death in New York, which is absolutely not true. So don't quote that. But the article was detailing all the reasons that there has been a misconception about the level of danger that's experienced. And it's a web of lots of different factors that have confused the first responders and fire departments that are figuring out what happened, confusing mopeds with e-bikes, and also just inflating the story. So that is a myth that can be debunked, and we have not seen or experienced or heard of any issues with charging infrastructure creating a risk when offered for e-bike and e-scooter users. So if you want to debunk it further, feel free.
I would love to, but you're right. I think when people always want to New York specifically, that you've been had, but very late, essentially,
Yeah.
Devices that actually can cause fires, whether they're within buildings, housing, right? So there's hesitancy, I think, in designing and charging infrastructure because the fire department still point to that. It's like, you don't want to become war, but how do we have support this growing?
So just for those online, that line of questioning was about fire risk and charging infrastructure. Yes.
I come at this problem with elected officials.
Yeah.
And one thing I'd like to say is just rules, laws, and signs apply to people that conform to societal norms. And unfortunately, there are a lot of bad actors out there that ruin it for everybody else. The real concern that I have, we have a pretty significant off-road trails, most of it paved, many miles, off-road vehicles, and with a lot of ATVs, unlicensed cycles, small motorized bikes, and then we get into e-bikes, and a tremendous amount of walking. Deconflicting that is almost impossible, and in New Jersey, you can't chase it. So, do you have any thoughts on how you deconflict the ATVs, motorcycles, et cetera, that use these trails? And it's not just the suburban areas. So the off-road vehicles are all over the place on sidewalks and roads, all over the country.
So the question for those online was starting with the fact that rules and regulations only go so far, and I think that's why Jean touched on a lot of the other approaches and principles that you need to think about. An interesting nuance in this question is asking about when it comes to interaction with ATVs, all-terrain vehicles, and other motorized vehicles that we've seen both on city streets, urban streets, as well as in suburban and rural areas. And how do you deconflict that interaction?
Well, I'll just start by saying rules and laws do state intention and make it, codify who the good actors are. I mean, so it's important from that perspective. So just want to reinforce that idea. And for people who are breaking the law, which those are not legal uses of the trail network that you're describing, if I understood you correctly, that, you know, at that point, it does become enforcement or looking for strategies that further design for the activity that you are inviting and discourage the activity that you are discouraging. And I don't know the specifics of the, you know, areas you're describing enough to give a specific recommendation, but access points, if there's a way to better address who fits, who, you know, who can access at a certain access point. You know, but also there's the option of campaigns and messaging that call out the bad actors. I mean, these are the tools that we have. And if you want to, and I think it's going to be a combination of, you have to take a combination of strategies to address a problem like that, which might also include thinking about why they are using the trail instead of the roadway, and maybe finding ways to better accommodate a variety of vehicle sizes on the roadway.
Thank you.
Did you want to answer that question? Okay. Okay.
Okay, yeah, one more question. Thank you. Thanks.
You visit the home state, and especially along the shore, there are a bunch of towns with boardwalks that have come up against the conflict with e-bikes, and a lot of them are really kind of restrict by mode. And what would you say is like the best approach to kind of changing their minds and getting them down to something like, per se, a speed limit for all modes? Like, what do you think is the best way to do it?
So the question was regarding particularly in shore communities where you have boardwalks and conflicts on the boardwalks between user types. What would Jean suggest in terms of approach there? Before I let Jean answer, I'll say you should also ask James that question during the panel. I think he'll talk about a strategy that they used in Asbury Park.
Well, I might just punt to James. Were you talking about specifically the boardwalk context of that being?
The context of the boardwalk, it is like, it's a multi-use, very like a sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And after, I believe they did a restriction,
Mm-hmm.
which is one option, but we're trying to figure out the best way to maybe, there are new municipalities that are trying to ban e-bikes
Mm-hmm.
on boardwalks and that are not at the park.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to just outright ban the road as opposed to something that might be a little bit more appropriate, like a universal speed limit or a temporal restriction.
Yeah, no, that's great, and the right intention. I'll just give a couple of examples that may be relevant. I know there are cases where for a trail network, if there's a heavily congested or kind of an especially constrained or sensitive area, creating a bypass, I don't know that that's an option when you have a boardwalk situation, but essentially, you know, a bypass where you say these users go this way and these users go this way. Also cases where there's a marked sign slow zone because there is a constrained or congested area. And so, you know, you could limit it by peak hour or peak time, or you could just say, this is an area that needs special attention and it's a slow zone all the time. Even having dismount zones, which is, I think, not ideal, but, you know, if you are trying to maintain a continuous network that gets people where they need to go safely, you know, you find the solution that works to maintain that. So a slow zone would be, you know, marking and telling people to go at a pedestrian speed, essentially.
All right. Thanks everyone for those questions. Thank you, Jean, for the presentation and taking those questions. We will now take a 12-minute break. For those of you online, please know that we'll keep the webinar going and we'll give a 1-minute warning as we're about to come back into session, so to speak. For those of you in the room, if you could be back in your seats by 10:45, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. All right, thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you had a productive break. Again, feel free to get up as needed during the event. That's fine. We realize this is a long event. So now I'm happy to introduce our moderator and panel for some more in-depth discussion about the many facets of e-micromobility. So we heard from Jean, led about principles and design, and some of those directly apply here. But there's other topics that we need to talk about when we're talking about e-micromobility, whether it's accessibility, affordability, equity, and of course, safety. So we're going to have a very productive conversation. There will be, again, time for question and answer at the end. It may even be sprinkled in. That's moderator's prerogative. If you do ask a question from the audience, if you can, please use a microphone, hit the gray button to turn it on, hit the gray button to turn it off. But if you can't access one, again, Amelia will repeat the question for those online. So to introduce our panel, our moderator, Amelia Crody, is Director of Trails and Equitable Access for the Pennsylvania Environmental Council. She's an active member of the Circuit Trails Coalition, working to ensure this regional trails network of trails is inclusive, welcoming, and provides equitable access to all the benefits of those trails. Amelia has 18 years of experience in active transportation, having co-founded Southern California Families for Safe Streets and led the LA Vision Zero Alliance. Laura Culp, one of our panelists, is planning manager for the Indigo Bike Share System, which is operated by Philadelphia-based Bicycle Transit Systems. As the first urban planner hired by Bicycle Transit Systems, Laura has brought innovative urban planning strategies to Indigo's ambitious expansion and has been responsible for installation and optimization of over 150 Indigo stations. James Bonanno is the Transportation Director for the City of Asbury Park. Before his employment with the City of Asbury Park, he held positions within the Voorhees Transportation Center, Easy Ride Transportation Management Association, and the Monmouth County Division of Planning. Chris Doherty is Director of Design and Construction for the Delaware River Waterfront Corporation. He manages implementation of open space and trail projects along Philadelphia's central Delaware waterfront, including the popular Delaware River Trail. Each of these panelists engages with e-micromobility in a different way and has different experiences and perspectives to share. Like I said, there will be time for question and answer, so keep your questions in mind. With that, Amelia, take it away.
Sean, hi, friends. Can everyone hear me? We're doing to lean in, maybe here. Let me switch. So hi, as Sean said, thank you for that introduction. And also thank you to Jean for coming up here to our region to share all of your knowledge and experience. So as Sean said, I'm Amelia Crotty with the Pennsylvania Environmental Council, where I have the privilege of working to make our regional trail network as accessible and equitable as possible. And I think I'm here because of the experience that I bring with active transportation, but I also wanted to share on a personal note that 2 years ago when I was pregnant with twins, which I don't recommend, the Indigo e-bikes were my lifeline. I couldn't walk that comfortably, I couldn't drive, and I wanted to stay active. And so the e-bikes provided me with the mobility I needed to like stay engaged in the world. It always made people look when I went by with like my huge belly on the e-bikes. But they kept me like engaged in the world while I was pregnant, which can sometimes be an isolating experience. So anyway, thank you to your team for that. And I also, when I was in Los Angeles though, I was in LA during the rollout of some really highly unregulated e-scooter systems. And so I've seen that side as well of the e-micromobility kind of universe. So I like how Jean, you framed it as nuanced. I was going to say that it's a gnarly topic. And so we are going to get into it all here with these three fabulous doers. I've worked on the advocacy side for a while, and I like to call the folks that are actually like implementing systems and running them the doers. And so we have great experience here with these three panelists. So we're going to get into it all with them now. So, so we have James, Laura, and Chris, as Sean described. And I have a slew of questions for them. There's a lot to cover. I'm gonna try to get through as much as I can and leave about 20 minutes at the end for questions from you all. So we'll see how much we can get through. So let's start by having you each introduce yourselves a little bit further and briefly share how your work intersects with E-Micromobility, which I wish had a simpler name because I'm about to say it like 75 times. And if you would, I also want to just hear a couple of words about like where you stand on E-Micromobility, like haiku length. And we can start with James.
Sure. So I'm the Director of Transportation for the City of Asbury Park. We are a 1.5 square mile city located on the waterfront, New Jersey. I, among other things, operate and maintain our contracts with our shared mobility partners, as well as maintain all of our roadway networks and bicycle infrastructure. And, you know, e-mobility for us has been an important tool on one of the biggest things I say is managing parking. In a place where parking demand is high, having the e-mobility option really encourage people to get out there that wouldn't normally ride a bike to get around. And I think it's an important strategy to have.
Thanks. Laura?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? The mic is in like a weird spot. My name is Laura Culp. I'm the planning manager for the Indigo Bike Share program, which is our local bike share here in Philadelphia. If you're not familiar with Indigo, we have approximately 250 stations and about 1,800 bikes. We are a completely docked system here in the city. We are the only operator of bike share in Philadelphia. So unlike some cities where you might see multiple types of scooters and bikes all over the city, the only one you'll find here in Philadelphia is Indigo. I've been with Indigo about 3 years as the planning manager, and my job is very much based in our long-term expansion. So we have a long-term goal of by 2026, 2027, getting to 350 Indigo stations and 3,500 bikes. We are now more than 50% e-bike. We've been slowly growing our e-bike fleet since 2018, and we are now more than 50% e-bike. So we have some classic bikes, which we call, you may hear me say analog bikes, inside term. It's we call them analog bikes. So we are partially analog and partially e-bike throughout the city. So looking forward to talking about the Indigo system today. Cool, thank you.
And good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Doherty. I'm the Director of Design and Construction at the Delaware River Waterfront Corporation here in Philadelphia. We manage the redesign and development of that corridor along the waterfront from effectively Oregon Avenue to Allegheny. It's almost 6 miles of waterfront. And one of the central features unifying that is our Delaware River Trail, which we just constructed in 2022. And that's 2 miles of completely separated bidirectional cycle track, as well as a footway that is seeing incredible use. And so our perspectives come from sort of the management of that traffic and how, with this great success of the trail, how we apply policy or other systems to balance the users and resolve conflicts. So.
Excellent. So we have an operator, we've got the municipal side, we've got like the trail manager, the designer. So great perspectives here. So we heard from Jean earlier about the rapid growth of e-micromobility, particularly within shared systems. So I'm curious to know how that expansion, how that growth, and how the market has grown, has impacted your role and your work, what you've seen on the ground in Asbury Park and on the trails and with your systems. And who would like to start?
I'll
James?
start.
Yeah.
It's a beach town. We've always had a lot of bicycles, as well as other modes, skateboards, whoever else. I think in 2018, 2019 is when e-mobility started to kind of show up on our streets, at least. And it's become very popular. It's definitely changed the way that we have to look at our network, in the sense that people are going farther distances now than they were originally. People are willing to take that ride a little farther because they're not, put all the effort in themselves. It's also, from a regulatory standpoint, it's different because now you have, motorized vehicles. People are kind of, doing what they want, having a good time and riding. And it's some new conflicts have arisen that we have to be aware of. So it's definitely a change, but it's definitely a welcome change in that while it's new, while there's complications, it's the usefulness of it has proven to be exceptional.
Anyone else?
Sure. So as I said, we launched our e-bike fleet in approximately 2018. We started talking about them. And we have seen an explosion of growth. So during COVID, when a lot of transit systems saw a deep dive in their usage, we saw really strong ridership, both from an e-bike and from a general bike perspective. So in 2023, for the first time, Indigo did 1 million trips. We've seen an explosion of our e-bike ridership, both with our classic pass holders and also our access pass holders. So the Indigo bike share system has an access pass, which provides a discounted fare for individuals who receive WIC benefits, state benefits. And we've seen that individuals who have an access pass are more likely to take e-bike trips. We also see a lot of e-bike trips come in from the periphery of our system. So our system is kind of built like a concentric ring model, and our farthest out stations, we see more e-bike trips from those stations as well.
Oh, interesting. How about you on the trails?
So we certainly have seen a rise of it, and I think from a broad policy perspective, I think DRWC wants that kind of use, and for all the good reasons we talked about, as a gateway into other forms of health and recreation. So that being said, the speed differentials between vehicles that are exiting driveways at conflict points, and even speed differentials between cyclists themselves are becoming something of a challenge. And so we've embarked on an etiquette campaign that involves some on-the-ground signage, as well as some messaging that we do through our normal social media channels. So I'd like to measure a little bit more as far as how those campaigns are working, but we are trying to manage those conflicts. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, we're gonna come back to that. I want to come back to something that you mentioned about the access pass. So, and just touch on accessibility. We know that e-micromobility can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by replacing car trips and solve these first last miles issues that someone raised earlier, make outdoor recreation so much more accessible. So what are the ways that we can make sure that everyone has access to these systems? So if you want to describe sort of more about your program, or if you have anything in place in Asbury Park that you want to describe, or if there are other models out there that we want to try to make sure that allow people equal access to e-micromobility options.
Sure. So I'll start talking about our access program. So the Indigo program was the very first bike share program in North America, or in the United States, to launch a low-income pass option. So for individuals who receive state benefits, you are eligible to receive a discounted pass, which both discounts your monthly pass or your annual pass, whichever one you choose to sign up for, as well as your e-bike fees. So we do have a little bit of an extra fee, as was mentioned earlier, per mile when you ride an e-bike, or it's actually per minute when you ride an e-bike. Our access pass provides a discount to both of those to allow individuals who are low income to be able to access our Indigo bike share system. We also do a planning, part of our planning process when we do expansion is we look to expand into areas of the city that are traditionally low income, traditionally socioeconomic, have a traditional Black communities, traditional low income communities. We look to expand into those, knowing that we want the system, the Indigo system, to look like Philadelphia. Philadelphia, as many people talk about, is the largest poor city. We want Indigo to not just be for the wealthy people, the white people, the people who live in the gentrified areas. We want Indigo to provide access for everyone in Philadelphia.
Before we go to Asbury Park, have you done any research on barriers to use, and other than financial, paying for access? And are there any programs that combat those barriers?
Sure, definitely. So there are a lot of, we've seen a lot of barriers to use. One of them is strictly people don't know how to ride a bike. They never had access to a bike before now. So we do a learn to ride program where when we do these programs where people are able to learn how to ride a bike, how to safely ride a bike. We provide helmets to communities to give people safer biking options. And yeah, that's what we do.
And sorry to follow up one more time.
Yeah,
Is there anything specific to e-bikes, do you think? I heard you say that more people are using e-bikes coming from the periphery. Is there anything that people need to learn about that? Have you found that specifically maybe in your learn to ride classes or anything like that?
I will say that we have found that there is some fear attached to that people don't necessarily understand the e-bike and the way that it functions. They see it, they think it's like a moped, they think it goes 30 miles an hour. There's a little bit of a fear attached to our e-bikes. So just getting people out there, getting people to learn to get on the bikes and ride the bikes, people really start to understand that they're pedal assist bikes, that they only go 17 miles an hour, they're capped at 17, and that they're just as easy to ride as a traditional bike. They are even easier to ride than a traditional bike. So it's more of just getting people familiar with the technology and having them understand what our options are.
Well, thank you. Okay, James, how about Nazir?
Sure, to expand on what Laura just mentioned, on top of the financial benefits of of low-income programs, stuff like that, there's also barriers for older generations. And we found, since we had scooter programs, seated scooters were one way to grasp a whole different group of people that were afraid to get on the scooter or afraid to try. Between the seated scooters, the financial benefits, and then as well as we partnered with Easy Ride Transportation Management Association, as well as our partner, the scooter company, to do educational courses, give people an opportunity to get on a scooter for free, learn how to ride it, how they're supposed to ride it. One, it teaches them how they're supposed to, properly use it, and it gives them a chance to experience it to see if they want to use it. It was a great way to kind of bring more people to the program than just people who were like, cool, scooter, let's hop on and go.
Right, I'm not that person. I would take the class for sure. So, Chris, do you have anything to respond to that? Or
I would just say from a design perspective, one of the more important things is how do you kind of get people out of cars? And so kind of urban trailheads are becoming important to us. And those exchanges between the trail network and public transportation is also important as well. So we have a transit marketing plan that we're gradually implementing to try and highlight those as well. So.
And that's exactly where I was gonna go. I think you've seen our questions, but what are so designing for trails and for future use, like Jean talked about, what are the challenges and opportunities that exist for improving infrastructure to accommodate these devices? And then as you began to talk about integrating them into transit systems or infrastructure systems, yeah.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's really the amount of space that you have to work with. And in the Delaware River Trail, we have a 6-lane arterial, Delaware Avenue, Columbus Boulevard, that is administered by PennDOT. And so we did have 25 feet of sidewalk to work with to convert into that cycle track. And so not everyone necessarily has that opportunity where you can do a 12-foot wide sidewalk and a 14-foot wide concrete sidewalk as well. So I think that's critical, trying to find that space wherever possible to if you have the utilization in an urban context to be able to do those segmentations of the different uses. I think that's important. So.
Did you do anything like that in Asbury Park? Were you able to?
No, we don't have any trails in Asbury Park where we can kind of do some projects like that. We stick to our network about roads. We try to build out more of our bus infrastructure to kind of provide places, but we don't have any off-road places to go.
And for scooters are encouraged to use bike lanes?
Scooters are encouraged to use bike lanes and all bicycle infrastructure,
Yeah.
yes.
Excellent. Oh, sure, sorry. I'm leaning back. Okay. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit. So when I was preparing for this, I found online that just recently at the end of December, that Asbury Park Scooter System Company actually pulled all of its services in North America. And I experienced this in Los Angeles too, where there was like a glut of scooters and then all of a sudden they disappeared, which you don't want that for users. You want a nice consistent experience. So I was just wondering, like, is there anything that cities can do to avoid this kind of disruption? Or is there a better model out there to avoid this kind of disruption?
I think scooters and bike share are moving in the way of more of a public transit situation where they may need a subsidy in the future. I think these are sustainable to a point, but if you kind of build a program that's a little restrictive, it gets the strain on the program. I would say as a municipality, it's important to look at your data and see how your program is performing and say, okay, I have, maybe if my program stops at 9 o'clock, which ours usually would beforehand, it stopping at 9 p.m. Our rides picking up at 8 p.m., 9 p.m. We should extend it an hour and see how 10 p.m. cutoffs works. And the numbers keep rising. And you should adapt your program to see the demand and meet the demand of your riders. Because that's going to keep the program healthy and thriving, as well as keeping your transportation network moving.
Bringing more money into the company that allows them to become stable. Right.
Good point.
Laura, do you have any reaction to that?
Yeah, so we at Indigo, we have an incredible partnership with the city of Philadelphia. Wafia Murray is here. She is our program manager with Otis within the city of Philadelphia. And we have a really strong partnership with them. We are a private operator, so we operate Indigo. We, it's a financial, something that we at BTS take on. But we have a really strong partnership with the city. We have a really strong partnership with IBX, which is the name where Indigo comes from. So really it's about both having that partnership with the city where the city understands that we are operating bike share. Bike share is expensive. There's challenges to operating bike share, but also from an internal standpoint, it's for us understanding what ways can we financially support ourselves. And it's a complicated process. I would say that one of the benefits of the Indigo system is that we are the only operator in Philadelphia. It's part of our contract that other operators are not allowed to operate here. So we completely have the market on bike share here. So that allows us to be able to, generate revenue. through
And
bike share.
with the shifts to more e-bikes in your system, is that causing a strain on the operations? It's forcing you, I'm sure, to like shift how you do things.
So we have a joke internally where BTS, we say it stands for battery transit systems, not bicycle transit systems. And we always say that we are actually a battery swapping company, not a bike share company. Because if you come to our Indigo warehouse, we have a room bigger than this room that is just nothing but batteries in every way, shape, or form, everywhere you look, for e-bikes, for stations, for docks. So it is definitely a continued challenge as we grow our system, that we constantly are working with batteries. We're constantly swapping batteries for our e-bikes, bringing them back in, inspecting them, swapping the battery, putting them back out. It's amazing how fast they're supposed to go 30 miles. We get about 30 miles on a charge. It's amazing how fast that goes away. So it's definitely an ongoing challenge that we work with, where as we expand the system, we expand our team. But yes, there's people who work for Indigo whose entire job is just swapping batteries.
Wow. I remember in Los Angeles with the scooters, they would pay people, and maybe this is customary, to move the scooters around so that they could then get charged again overnight. So I'm going to shift again to safety. So Jean debunked a bunch of myths. And again, in prepping for this, I found that in the last couple of weeks, Rutgers University just put out some research on e-scooters and their safety and just injury numbers. And that they found that e-scooter users actually do not have a greater risk of serious injury than bicyclists or e-bicyclists. So, but we know also that safety is all about perception. So can some of you talk about, maybe James, or what you've seen on the trail, some of the primary safety concerns that you face every day with different users?
Yeah, sure. I think a big part of this also is the equipment people are using. There's obviously safety perception. When something happens on a bicycle or a scooter, it's on the news. When there's a car crash, no one's talking about it. It's very in everyone's face, and it's very, very there to see and hear. But also, it depends on what equipment becomes available and what equipment people are using, because all the serious accidents we've had on an e-scooter or an e-bike have been makeshift or less expensive and less serious equipment. Smaller wheels, things that'll fall apart and break while they're riding. The actual collisions and people who are like having accidents similar to how you'd have a car accident are always minor, and there are very few of them. If you have the appropriate infrastructure, or if you're building infrastructure and building a place for these people to ride and cooperate with and mix with cars, you don't have that many issues. Over our entire program, since we've had bikes and scooters since 2018, we have very few collisions.
With an urban trail with many driveway crossings, some of which involve residential developments that have been built on piers, we do get anecdotally this perception that as they're exiting, there is a challenge with the speeds. It's not necessarily borne out, I think, in some of the research that we've seen. So, but it nevertheless has become a political issue and something that we have to handle. So we have actually retrofitted some of those crossings to add more thermoplastic for a kind of tactile experience. The residents of these places want more. They want bicyclists to reduce their speed even more, and we have to kind of explain to them that the whole point of the trail is to give pedestrians and cyclists a sort of priority. We sort of need to dial back the autocentricity there. So yeah, so we've had to work with our partners at Otis to rethink some of those conflict points and intersections. But our designers had really thought about mixing zones and conflict points and pinch points before that. We're just reacting, I think, as things change.
you want to talk about your etiquette campaign?
Sure. I think we borrowed heavily from other cities. I think our primary concern when we initiated the etiquette campaign was cyclists and pedestrians and that sort of speed differential. But the rise of those e-mobility devices has underscored, I think, the need for a way of communicating certain norms that is not hit you over the head, that doesn't have a lot of enforcement. We, as an organization, don't have that capacity, nor I think do we have the desire to be in that realm. And so the idea of what are the basic things that you as a trail user can do or need to do, situational awareness, urging that, speed in congested areas, we're targeting those as well with some signage. But I think it's just a general awareness of the other. I think is what we're trying to inculcate the trail using public about.
And primarily through signage.
Primarily
Yeah.
through that on-the-site signage,
Yep.
And I think once trail season in the spring kicks up, we'll deploy that signage. We have about 10, 12 messages. And the tone of the messages is really, again, kind of suggestive. We're not using harsh language or anything like that, but we borrowed heavily from, I think, Dallas Parks and Rec had an incident on one of their trails, and so they have a really great series of messaging that we utilize as well.
Okay, cool, thank you. So we talked about safety concerns, about design. I wanted to now ask James about regulation and legislation. So how do you see the regulatory landscape affecting the growth and adoption of e-micromobility?
I think that all these programs, either whether shared programs or whether you're allowing, bicycle in use in your town, it has to be a cooperative process and there has to be a plan involved. You'll see these cities that have, shared scooters sitting all over the sidewalks or all over the place. And it's a big turnoff for a lot of people because they don't like to see that blocking their way. But there's ways to manage all these things. There's ways to educate people on how they should be doing things. And if you have a plan in place, that can can alleviate a lot of the concerns people have and a lot of conflicts you see. So I think regulation is important. I think regulation based on how your program is supposed to work, where are there areas that you want people to slow down? Our shared services, they have areas of the city that they're more densely packed with pedestrians and outdoor dining. So we decrease the speed. There's slow zones. There's some zones you can't go in because of there being too many conflicts. And those aren't issues. They're plans and they're strategies to make everything flow and direct traffic in certain ways that are useful for everybody and safe. So I think regulations, especially in your agreements with your companies, or whether your laws on the roads and your signage and all your strategies about your boardwalks or whatever else, are a way to alleviate the issues that you wouldn't see if you had nothing. And there's always a limit. You could be too restrictive and discourage use. And I think that's what you have to kind of avoid. You have to accept that you're never going to get 100% compliance. You have to accept that you're not going to solve every problem, but you have to approach them and mitigate them as much as you can to both get the benefits from these kinds of tools and these mobility devices, as well as keeping people safe.
Okay, so this flows into something I wanted to raise is that I recently talked with a colleague of mine, Vicki Landers. She's the executive director of Disability Pride PA. And so I let her know that I was going to be part of this panel at E-Micromobility Summit. And she said two things immediately. One is that those scooters they're blocking the road. This is the thing that we commonly hear. They're blocking the right of way for people with physical mobility disabilities. And two, and this stood out to me, that they're not for us. They're not for us. We can't use them. And so there's already a perception of like, oh, they're blocking the way and they're not even ours. They're just getting in the way. They're just a nuisance and it's not right that they're not accessible. So, and the systems often have a check the box kind of like, yes, we have a mobility option or an adaptable option, but it's not actually convenient or easy to use for someone with a disability. So I just wanted to get your reactions and also just give you a space to share sort of like the challenges of meeting those different requirements or what you can do that's innovative maybe to help make systems more accessible. And then you talked a little bit about the like dealing with the parking and that. So I'm going to open it up to all three of you if you have comments or anything you want to share. Laura, do you want to start?
I can start, sure. So I will start with that. We have seen our e-micromobility, our e-scooter, our e-bikes, sorry, not scooters, e-bikes are they provide a level of accessibility to individuals. Like you said, when you were pregnant,
Right.
you know, found it easier to ride an e-bike than you did to ride a classic bike. We see in a lot of areas that specifically, we just expanded up into Manayunk, for example. If you've ever been to Manayunk, you know, it's like a mountain up there. So it provides the ability for people to actually cycle up those hills and access places like Roxborough, up on the top of the hill. So there is a level of accessibility that comes with an e-bike. However, there is always room for us to grow. It is something that comes up every year when we go to the Bike Share and Scooter Share Conference, that we like to talk to other cities about what have you done. Some places have adaptable bikes or alternative forms of transportation that you have to go somewhere to check out rather than having them kind of sprinkled throughout the system. It is a challenge because our system is a docked system, so a bike has to fit in a dock. And we've found that there's challenges there. At one point, we explored tricycles, for example, and a tricycle doesn't fit in a bike share dock, unfortunately. It makes things challenging, but it is something that we always talk about, and it's something that we're always open to exploring more of. And it's, you know, I wish I had a better answer than that, but it is a challenge, and it's something that we're always aware of.
I think we've done some programs with Vicky. Our trail system, there are some variations, and while I've talked extensively about the separate bicycle and pedestrian, some segments are just a multi-use path, and so we're going through a process of updating and upgrading trail as we go to the level of the Delaware River Trail in the central section. And so, you know, I think they might have done an event down on a more narrow trail. And so again, creating those new spaces for all uses and abilities, I think is important too.
I think the biggest thing here is like with those concerns about being in the sidewalks and things. There's so much technology in these devices. You know, we have a dock list system, or had a dock list system that we consider docked. We have specific stations geocoded into our system that you can't end a rental unless you're in that area. We position them in areas that we knew we could fit scooters. We painted on the ground with where the scooters should be. We have signage that show you this is where you park and this is how you use the scooters. And we found that keeps the scooters centralized in certain locations. Of course, you're going to have the lone scooter that's going to sit across the sidewalk every once in a while, but people will line them up. If you have them lined up, people will line their scooters up. They are pretty responsible and want to put them back where they're found. And it keeps them, they might go to a place, say, oh, why can't I just put it right here? Oh, there's the corner, there's the scooters, let's put them over there. And in partnership with your company also, they will go around and they will, when they're recirculating these devices around the city, they can just stack them back up in the spot where it's supposed to be. If there's one around, they'll pick it, move it over. We have very little problems with that. And we're very successful with our geocoding system. And it's been very neat the entire time we've had our dock list system. So I think there are strategies and technology available, but I think a lot of people either don't know about them or don't take advantage of them.
Did you use an enforcement, or was there very little enforcement needed for the scooter system?
As far as like
Parking or?
So we have our shared services, obviously. The company can track the users based on their vehicles. And we made sure that they were vigilant about who was leaving scooters around, if they were throwing them around, if they were using them in ways that shouldn't be, that they would penalize those riders, whether it's you know, messaging, hey, we saw this, don't do it again, this is the correct way to use it, whether it was postponements or banning. So that's the way we were able to manage some of our poor users of the system.
Complying. Okay. So I just wanted to look ahead now. So how do you foresee technology evolving in e-micromobility? And what does it mean for the work that you're doing? Or even the designs that you're designing?
Sure. Yeah, I think the geofencing is an interesting option, and that I think we'll see incorporated into the physical components of trails. I think some of the strategies that we're applying, I would like to see if we're getting a reduction in speeds and hopefully a reduction in conflicts and injuries. There are, I know Pinellas County has done some work in terms of some speed feedback so that people actually see the speed that they're going, and that's almost a regulator. So I'd like to see some of those technologies maybe deployed on those locations where we know we have some higher speeds. So, but I think, yeah, the geofencing, you guys are doing it at a very, very sophisticated level, and I think that's probably the way of the future.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I think GPS is one of the strongest tools. I also think simple things like speedometers can really help. Private devices, especially ones that are regulated, shared services, you can kind of cap and govern how fast they go. But private devices, people are up to use them however they want. And as a motorcycle rider, as an EV rider, you don't always know how fast you're going, and it feels different depending on what kind of environment you're in. Our scooters, when we first brought them in, they went 15 miles per hour. And we said, this feels fast, lower it down to 12. When I was in Scottsdale, I'm on the road and I'm doing 18 miles an hour on the scooters, and I'm like, I need to go faster. Like, it just completely changes based on your environment.
Yeah.
So having that available to you and seeing how fast you're going can definitely fix a lot of the problems that, you see someone going by, they're going so fast and they don't really feel it. Also with the GPS, I mean, there's ways to do slow zones, there's ways to do no ride zones, and there's also ways, I mean, as it improves, to get more fine. Maybe you could, it was a program that we were working with our company to fine tune the GPS to the point where you couldn't leave the roadway to avoid scooter use on the sidewalks, something like that. So that's future technology that could be useful in managing locations of where you can use certain programs.
Right. Maybe Laura.
So I have two thoughts on that, but I want to kind of go off of what you just said, which is not necessarily Indigo, but the idea of e-micromobility and e-bikes is that, on a personal level, I live in Manayunk, I use the SRT when I commute to work. And when you have someone whizzing by you on an e-bike, it's not an Indigo bike, because Indigo bikes are capped at 17 miles an hour, but you have people on private vehicles who are going what feels like 50 miles an hour. I'm sure that they can't go that fast. But sometimes it's really just awareness. It's having people know how fast you're actually going. And when you're on a straight path like the SRT, maybe you feel like you're going, not quite as fast as you actually are. So I really think that just having people be aware, whether it's, when you're driving and you go by one of those things that flashes at you that says you're going 30, the speed limit is 25, that's enough just for some people to say, oh, okay, and slow down. So I think that really bringing awareness for people who are riding private e-micromobility devices is a really interesting way to kind of start to curb that behavior, just for people to make the right decision. Just give people a chance to make the right decision to slow down from safety standpoint, and educating the public on why you need to slow down. Why shouldn't you be going 35 miles an hour on the SRT? And it's because there's, people walking, there's dogs, there's children, et cetera. As far as what the future of e-micromobility looks like from an Indigo standpoint, as I said, we're expanding our system. We're going to get up to 350 stations by 2026, 2027. And we are supplementing those docks with bikes, and we will be adding lots more e-bikes to our system. We've seen a lot of success with our e-bikes. We are beefing up our analog bikes as well, because there are people who would just rather ride a classic bike than an e-bike, which is totally fine. But we are constantly adding e-bikes to our system because we see people ride them all over the city. We can't keep them charged. We can't keep them out there. There's always someone saying, my e-bike is dead, and I'm sorry.
I love that the app now though tells you.
Yeah, it does.
the
Isn't that
charge.
great?
It's awesome because they don't have to go through and click everyone.
Yep.
Before we shift to questions from the audience, are there any, I know we had like 2 dozen more questions. Is there anything you wanted to say before we shift into questions that I didn't get to? Do you want to hype or words of wisdom to share, or otherwise we go straight to questions?
I have something I want to say, which is that if you're doing this from a community engagement standpoint, we do a lot of work with the Philadelphia community. And as a planner, I look at something like a bike lane or like an e-bike and say like, that's great. That's what the community needs. But the community doesn't always see it that way. The community may look at an Indigo station and think that's not for me. That means that someone's going to come in and push me out. And that is a perception that we are trying to change at Indigo. As we continue to expand, as we continue to go out into communities and have a seat at the table and talk to them, we really want people to understand that Indigo is for everyone. But there's always going to be that little hesitation there. And I think that's something really important for planners to understand, that just because we as planners know that this is a great resource, there is still going to be that little bit of time where you have to show the community, walk with the community, have them understand that this is for them.
Yeah, I guess we work very closely, I think, with Indigo and bicycle transit systems. And I think one of the things that we want to correlate a little better is what happens when you do provide the best infrastructure of an all ages facility. What happens then to your travel patterns? utilization. So we actually did have an undergrad working a little bit in that, but I think it's a study that we'd like to bolster a little bit more because they go hand in glove. The functionality of that system is just as dependent on the quality of the built environment. So.
Excellent. Okay, so with that, we're going to shift to questions from the audience. Let me turn around. All right. I'm going to be repeating it back, unless I'll always repeat it. Yeah, okay, go ahead. I think you,
Oh, I saw the lip person.
and then, go ahead.
I'd like to know, are there many thefts with the bikes?
Okay, so the question was if there are many thefts with bikes and scooters?
Yes.
Okay, specifically e-bikes, or specifically Indigo bikes. So bike loss is an ongoing thing that we deal with. Everyone who operates a bike share system deals with bike loss, except for one community in Canada I met that they do not have. They're like, I don't know why. They were horrified when I said that people lost bikes, and I was like, well, Canada's, I guess, a little different than Philadelphia. So
A little
so-
different.
a little different. So there is we do experience bike loss. But we find that through community engagement, we have good partnerships in communities, if people feel like it is theirs, they are more likely to respect it. And when we come in and drop them in a community that we've never spoken to, they're more likely to get vandalized. They're more likely to get, to have the bikes pried out or whatever may happen. We also have good relationships with communities that people will let us know when they see a bike that we're like, that's probably not supposed to be there. That bike has been abandoned, that bike is lost. We do find that through partnerships with communities, we get a lot of our bikes back. We also have private security that goes out to collect our e-bikes, which have GPSs on them, when they do, end up not being docked back where they're supposed to. So we've actually seen a sharp decrease in our bike loss over the last couple of years. But yes, Philadelphia, public system, we do see some bike loss.
Go Eugene.
So we actually didn't experience any scooter loss in our programs at all.
There you
Okay.
go.
Yeah, so we did not experience any loss of vehicles in our program. There was always the concern that people were going to steal them if they're not docked in, if they're not tied down, or people would mess with them at night. I mean, our original scooter program, all scooters had to be off the streets at 9 p.m. And the concern was that people were going to throw them through business windows and things like that. And in the next program, we said, let's keep them on the streets, like, let's keep them out, see what happens. There was nothing. There was no concerns with people throwing them. It never happened. There was 3 that were put in a lake, and we fished them out. But otherwise, there really wasn't much theft or damage to them. They were robust vehicles. And I think that the share companies know they have to build robust vehicles to maintain that.
I think there are whole Instagram accounts dedicated to like bike share and scooters just being discarded random places.
Yeah, we have people who follow Facebook Marketplace that always look
Yes.
for people selling bikes. So.
Okay, in the corner?
I guess it's for James, but have you seen that because of the e-scooter share program, that there was like a reciprocal private growth in micromobility?
Okay.
That's like correlated, all of that?
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
Can I just repeat the question?
Oh, sure.
So the
sure.
question was, with the growth of the shared system for scooters, was there a similar growth in private ownership of e-scooters?
Yeah, so we launched our first scooter program in 2019, and in 2020, that company went out of business. And when those scooters disappeared, you started seeing all kinds of vehicles pop up that were e-motored, whether it was the one-wheel things or the skateboards or whatever else. And I've seen, even in my ride numbers through the years, they don't increase the way you physically see the people on the road, because there's a lot of people who ride them, say this is extremely useful, and they go buy their own. So that's very common, and it definitely is something I saw in my municipality, especially after we launched the shared services.
I really like the game. It's a big to expand it.
It's an on-ramp.
Sure, I think for e-vehicles, definitely, they're not cheap, and if you can rent one for a few dollars and try it out, it could be your gateway.
Okay, any other questions? Right here in the middle?
Yes, this is a question to Laura. Now, you said that you have the goal of increasing e-bikes to 250 stations by 2026. I was wondering if there's any plans to expand the Indigo bikes outside of Philadelphia. Well, I've seen the Indigo bikes. They're very lovely. Unfortunately, I never knew how to ride a bike, but they're very, very lovely as I see them just about every day. And Roxborough is like San Francisco. You see all the hills and all that other stuff.
So thank
So,
you.
so yeah, that's my question. Like, is there any goals to increase, like in Montgomery County, in Bucks County, Delaware County, or parts of New Jersey, Chester County, like in all the 9 regions that DVRPC is talking about?
Right, thank you. So the question was, if there are any plans to expand the Indigo system outside of Philadelphia, or if you, maybe DVRPC could share information about other counties that are interested in bike share.
Sure. So we would love to expand Indigo outside of Philadelphia. Currently, our contract is with the city of Philadelphia, so we are contained within the boundaries of Philadelphia. But we are talking to municipalities outside of the city. We recognize that having a regional bike share system would be much more beneficial than having other communities bring in separate bike share. We would like to be able to create a network that allows people to go to Camden, allows people to go to Lower Merion, allows people to really access what is outside of the city of Philadelphia. So we are always looking to speak to municipal leaders, and we are always interested in potentially expanding Indigo outside of the city. But as of right now, Indigo is an initiative of the city of Philadelphia, and we are within the Philadelphia boundaries.
I am aware that Delaware County has embarked on a micro-mobility plan, so they're looking at what they can do in their communities. So I'll mention that.
Thank you, Sean. I have to just share that when I lived in Los Angeles, if you know anything about LA, there are little cities within the city. Santa Monica is a separate city, Culver City is a separate city, and each one had its own bike share system. And so you couldn't ride from like downtown LA and park in Culver City. You'd have to like park outside and then switch. And it was like, don't y'all talk to each other and realize that we don't live with these boundaries? Like, anyway, I'm glad to hear your answer there. Okay, so I see one more question here. Okay. So what is the source? Oh. Great question. It's a great question. So the question was, what is the source of funding for trail design or trail retrofits to address maybe e-micromobility and different devices that are coming up?
So most of the funding for our capital work does come through City of Philadelphia allocation. I don't know of any specific programs per se that deal with retrofits for safety, but I would have to imagine that there are. But we also use our own internal funds because the scale of those projects is such that you could likely do them. They're probably sub 20 grand kinds of things. So so we do a lot of that internally as well. Well, I guess in terms of, I'll maybe let you guys do in terms of maybe program, bike share,
So,
program development.
Yeah,
but-
what's the funding source for program development for our shared system?
Sure. So it depends on what kind of program you want to run. I'll say that when you have a physically docked system, there's more of an expense. Our original bike share was a docked system, and we had to find either sponsors or pay for the installation and the maintenance of that station. And then obviously there was really that ongoing cost for year to year. When we switched to a dockless scooter program and we started using those GFNs locations, there was no longer that cost to maintaining or installing stations. We were able to install and remove stations as we needed them and move scooters as we needed them. And the program became completely free for the city. And actually, we had a revenue share program where we were making money on the scooter rentals.
And do you want to add anything? No? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, right there in the back. Then I'll go over here. I see you back there.
All right, so the shared e-micromobility systems collect GPS data as to where users are traveling, right? So has any of this data specifically informed decisions for infrastructure improvements for active transportation?
Good question. Okay, all good? Oh,
And that question's for everyone.
okay, we're just turning mics back on.
They're all off.
Yeah, they must have a timer. So the question was, so the shared systems collect a ton of data on patterns, and has that data been used to address infrastructure needs?
Yeah, so our scooter program especially, I like to try and grab bike counts when I can, but the scooter's always kind of just grabbing data based on their trips. And you have these other, vendors that will take that data and put it in ways that are easy for you to understand and easier to interpret. And it definitely shows you like where, what areas you have the most scooters being rented from or going to, or what routes people are taking more heavily. And it really influences, where you should be putting infrastructure, whether it's lanes, whether it's new stops, whether it's more scooters or signage. So that definitely is something that we use, at least in municipalities, for our decision making.
So for Indigo, I would say that the O's and D data definitely influences where we're going to expand our system and where we're going to add capacity. That's really the way that we kind of evaluate where the need is, whether we have the places where people take the most frequent trips. We also can kind of use it to take a guess about the routes that people might be taking based on the location of existing infrastructure. But I would almost say it's the opposite, where we are influenced by where the city is planning to add infrastructure when we are looking to where we're going to put Indigo. We want Indigo to be used in a safe manner more than anything else. So when we are contacted by communities who are maybe don't have that kind of infrastructure yet, we really are trying to look for ways that people could realistically use the system in a way that is safe. So for example, we had talked to someone who was interested in Roosevelt Boulevard. If you've ever been on Roosevelt Boulevard, it might not be the best place currently for Indigo bikes. So we're really looking for ways that we can expand into communities, but also we want to make sure that they're going to be safe for people to use.
And I would say, while we don't necessarily have data on usage as these operators do, we do have a dedicated trail tracking device that's situated and can track pedestrians and bicyclists. And one of the things that we noticed is that there are commuter spikes. And so we're starting to use that data in our conversations for funding. That cycling, walking is a part of a balanced regional transportation system. So I think there was a suggestion that everyone collect data on trail use, and I would strongly advise that as well.
Okay, I'm gonna go to this side. Okay, we'll start with you and then you. Hmm. Okay, so the question was about if some of our panelists are working with the ride-sharing companies on curb management and safety and drop-offs.
I would say, yes, we have tried to consolidate drop-offs, but the compliance with that by individual drivers and individuals is very difficult to mandate. But I think trying to kind of corral them into certain areas. One of the design features that we do have throughout the trail, at points throughout the trail, is a planted area. And so that can kind of dissuade people from using that as a pickup and drop off spot. But it's a consistent challenge, especially when we have so many activity centers and amusement centers along Delaware Avenue. So, but we're still looking at it.
It's a really hard thing to manage sometimes. As professionals, we're forced to rework something that was not designed for these uses. It was designed with cars in mind and didn't care about anybody else. And we're coming in trying to make it work now and, re-educate people to act differently than how they've been doing for so long. And I think education is the biggest part of this. When seatbelts were new, no one wanted to wear them. And one of the biggest ways we got people to wear seatbelts was to educate the children. And as children grew up, they either nagged their parents, why aren't you wearing your seatbelt? Why aren't you wearing your seatbelt? And the parents got annoyed and just put it on. Or they started wearing them themselves as they got older and it kind of phased out. It's this whole, bicycle structure, it's still new to a lot of people. And we have to drill it into the kind of society that we have, that these are here, these are for bicycles. There's an area for you to drop off, pick up. We're going to try and provide that for you, but you can't just do it anywhere you want anymore. It's definitely a societal norm that we have to change and provide the infrastructure where we can. And we always have that option. It's the hard part.
Okay, I said you, and then I'll go to you all the way in the back.
So first, really quickly on the question of funding, I do know that one specific source that people have used to do that initial investment in a docked bike share is CMAQ funding. So that's something that you could look into if you're thinking about it. You can repeat.
I'm back on. Okay, so, so our audience member just said that CMAQ funding can help for, bike share, the planning of it or implementation? Oh, docked bike share. Look into CMAQ.
But my question was, with adaptive bike share. So I know that Indigo has an exclusive contract and you are docked, but the adaptive programs that are really like best practice, like MOGO in Detroit, are more trail-based rental programs. So is there the possibility of maybe a partnership between Indigo and the Delaware River Trail to bring some adaptive bikes to Philadelphia?
Okay, so question, you're off again.
Yes. So the question was, is there potential for a partnership between Indigo and a company called MOGO? No, sorry.
No, MOGO is Detroit.
Oh, okay.
bike share.
Anyway, oh, sorry, and Delaware River Trail to bring adaptive bikes to the trail. Got it? Okay.
I would love to do that. I don't know what. It would depend entirely on the intricacies of the contract we have with the city of Philadelphia. And if Chris was interested in us. But we would love to come up with some creative ways to really bring accessible micromobility to the city. But yes, we definitely, when I think about accessible and adaptive micromobility, the first thing that comes to my mind is MOGO, which is Detroit's bike share system. They have really great, we talk to them every year at the conference. They have really great programs there. So we would love to, if they would be interested in us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's why we built the facility in the first place. And so to continue to push the frontier of users, I think is great. So yeah, absolutely.
One of the challenges for Indigo is that we are limited to the technology that is created by our provider. So it is a little complicated to explain, but Indigo has a bunch of different components. It is operated by Bicycle Transit Systems, but our technology, our bikes, our docks, our stations are created by a company called B-Cycle, which is part of Track Bike. So we purchase the technology and then we operate the technology, but we do not manufacture the technology. So we do have some level of limitation as far as we can only provide what they provide us.
Interesting. I did just want to hype that the Circuit Trails Coalition has partnered with Disability Pride PA on the Delaware River Trail to Disability Pride PA is hosting Exploring Outdoors for people with disabilities. So this is already sort of starting to happen, and they actually are also doing accessibility audits of the trails. So this could be a really terrific marriage. Thank you for the suggestion. Okay, in the back.
So you said you have, Indigo has decided to take their different batteries there. What happens to batteries that don't work anymore? I know that's a concern in cars and e-mobility and all of that, but electric vehicles, whatever, scooters and everything, they still have this battery. How do you work with that? How long,
Okay, so what happens to the batteries after their lifespan has ended in the Indigo system in particular?
So our system takes multiple different kinds of batteries. We have our e-scooter or e-bike. I don't know why I keep saying e-scooter. E-bike batteries. We have our station batteries. So our large kiosks with the solar panel on them, inside of a lot of them is a battery. For the last 2 weeks where we had no sun for 2 weeks, we had a lot of stations that needed batteries. And then our brand new 3.0 docks, which are our small docks, each have a battery about this big inside of them. So we have an entire room that is extremely large, that is fireproof, that we use to charge all of our batteries. What is their end of life plan? Their end of life plan is that they get recycled. So we participate in a recycling program where we, through E-Cycle, we are able to recycle our batteries. They're taken apart and as much of them is reused as possible.
Awesome. Okay, I think I'll get one more on that side, and then I'm going to start going that way. Okay, so how are we encouraging people to slow to pass? Is that, yes, is that it? Oh, and how are we measuring that if possible? Okay. Can you get that?
We have not directly measured speed, but I think there are ways that it can be done. It's just a question of capacity and getting somebody out there to do those sorts of things. But we do target that behavior of passing in some of our signage that if you're passing, if anyone is passing anyone, that they should be signaling with their bell. And it's interesting to see that e-bicyclists have greater compliance of that sometimes than regular cyclists. So, but passing is a critical behavior that we're trying to look at. Yeah.
I think once again, education is the strongest tool here. I think people need to understand what they're riding, how they're riding, and how they should be riding, as well as how everyone else should be interacting in that same space. You know, we operate cars in a certain way. You know, bicycles operate in a similar fashion. You know, there's bells for a reason, there's lights for a reason, there's helmets for a reason. And I think as these mode shares grow and people start learning, you know, this is how I should be interacting, and this is how this keeps me and some other people safe. I think that will alleviate a lot of those issues.
All right, okay, over here.
So our organization operates a bike share.
Right, okay, so for operators, is there anything on the horizon coming maybe that might make things simpler so you can charge in the field?
So, one thing that I have seen that I think is really interesting, is other cities will have partners with, will be partnering with individuals who use the system to physically take the battery out at night, take it home and charge it, and then put it back in. It's part of how they fund, basically the person gets use of the system and they get the bikes charged. Would that work in Philadelphia? Maybe not. But would that work in a potential suburb? Maybe. As far as emerging technology, I would say it depends a lot on technology provider. So there's only a handful of companies that build bike share equipment in the country. And there are some systems that are playing with charging docks. So a charging dock is you dock your bike and it gets charged while it sits there. They're starting to pop up around the country. So if that is a possibility with your technology provider, then that's something that's coming. I know other providers are working on it now that the tech has kind of popped up. People are now asking for it. I've heard mixed, you know, it's still a very new technology. But perhaps long-term, I would say that the solution to all of this, and we're really hoping for it because our big room of batteries is getting bigger every time we add e-bikes to our system. We hope that charging docks are in the future.
Okay, we have time for one more question. No pressure. Daniel.
Hi, thank you so much for this panel. It's been amazing. A lot of the safety questions have come back to space and speed. And even the name micromobility or e-micromobility kind of speaks to this larger looming elephant in the room that we've alluded to a few times, but there's a lot more space and there's a lot more speed with vehicles. And those, I mean, micromobility makes it sound like humans are like ants, but like this is our base scale. Shouldn't this just be mobility and that be macro mobility or something weird? So and to the point about, I mean, we've limited speeds on dockless scooters without, you know, kind of blinking an eye. It's just say, okay, let's just automatically cap the fleet maximum speed at 8 miles per hour. Would you support, in a hypothetical situation, I know this isn't out there right now, a max speed where, you know, cars are more connected to the internet, there's tracking, there's all these devices, you get downloads for Teslas from the internet instantly to max the speed out for vehicles in areas that have dense users, and that way, you know, you could create a slower space for people of all modes in those spaces with those vehicles if everyone's capped at, say, 10 or 15 miles per hour, not just the scooters, but the SUVs as well. Would you support that?
We're getting class. This is Daniel Pascal of the East Coast Greenway Alliance. If you've not met him, who will always bring this vibe and this energy into the space, reminding us what we should all be focused on. And so thank you for that, Daniel. And the question was if our panelists, maybe in their personal take, would support a caps on car speed, just like we have caps e-micromobility speeds.
I would say-
If you were controlling the world.
I think thank you again. California actually just introduced a bill about this, I believe. I think when it comes to a shared system, it's very easy and very obvious to do that. I think when it comes to personal devices, it gets very difficult. I mean, people are very specific about their freedoms. I think it would be, instead of doing like a GPS controlled thing where it's like you enter a zone, this is your max speed. I think it's more advantageous to do an industry-wide limitation on engine sizes and capabilities. I'm not a mechanic, I don't know how that would work, but do you need a car, or should we be selling cars that can go 200 miles an hour? I don't know that that's necessary unless you're going to be on a track somewhere. So I don't know if GPS is always the answer and like forcing everyone to do this one thing. I think people need to behave themselves as they are and should be responsible for their own actions. Because I think the other problem you're going to have is as soon as you have one electronic issue, which, listen, if you have millions of cars, you're going to have them, then who's at fault? And it becomes this whole kind of dive of like, who's responsible for their actions? And it's not me, the car's supposed to do the job for me, So I think people need to be responsible for their own actions. And I think there's other ways they can regulate it without making it a forced thing like that.
Any other opinions?
I think personally, not speaking for my company, I think that is an interesting idea. I've never thought of that. Having, everything kind of capped. I think perhaps what I would maybe lean more towards is the idea of just closing down roads and saying no cars here. And really limiting where the cars can go and really limiting and then creating space for other forms of mobility. I will say that from an Indigo standpoint, we see our greatest spikes in use on days where roads are closed. So we always talk about internally that we're chasing the Pope. Sounds ridiculous, but it's true. We're chasing the Pope because when the Pope was here, which our system was tiny, it was baby system, we hit ridership that we have never seen again. And we did 1 million trips this last year. And that's because the city was shut down and people couldn't drive around. So everyone got on Indigo bikes and we hit like 5,500 trips in one day, which we have never seen numbers like that since then. So we constantly chase the Pope. But what that shows is that we see it with the Philly Marathon. We saw it with the Eagles Parade, that when the roads are closed, people are so excited to jump on a bike. So it's really, I think, providing that safety that they say, this is a completely safe space for me to use this. People want to use it.
I would just say, great question, Daniel. I don't know if this is the perception of this room, but the driving culture has kind of gotten stranger and more erratic as post-pandemic, and I think well, probably true, yeah. But with that, I think you're going to have to look into those kinds of technologies, especially as autonomous vehicles, are taking over. So, yeah.
I see Sean looming over there.
I'm looming.
Thank you all. Thank you all for your terrific questions. This has been a really rich panel. Thank you all for being here. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that last question really puts a point on how these are all aspects of the transportation system, and we need to think about how they all work together and provide what people need to get around and get to the places that they're going. So today, just to give a brief summary, we heard about what micromobility is. We heard about how that is very nuanced, that there's lots of categories out there. And we heard about principled approaches to how to approach this new form of mobility that's emerging, that's here, and that will continue to change in the future. And then we had a great panel where we discussed, again, the nuance of this conversation and the problem solving that's already going on, as well as the opportunities that are out there. So again, great. Thank you for the conversation today. Before we break for lunch, I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who helped make this event possible. So thank you for our terrific guest speaker, Jean. Thank you for our panel, our panelists, Laura, James, Chris. Thank you, Amelia, for helping guide us through this nuanced conversation. And I want to thank, in preparation for this event, we actually interviewed a lot of different folks, and I just want to run through a number of those organizations. The Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia, the Voorhees Transportation Center at Rutgers University, the Circuit Trails Coalition, District of Columbia Department of Transportation, City and County of Denver, Colorado, and Denver Parks and Recreation Department, the Delaware River Waterfront Corporation, the City of Asbury Park, and Indigo Bike Share. I also want to thank all the DVRPC staff who put time and effort into this event. Karen Solareso and Ariella for their opening remarks today. Elise Turner and Gina Myers in our Office of Communications and Engagement for getting the word out. Angela Rio in our Creative Services Department for designing the materials for today's event. Our operations staff, Alyssa Driscoll, Mike Andrews, Naja Jackson, and Renee Wise. Our IT specialist, Tyrell Powell, who helped set up the sound system for today. And our specific summit planning team. These were all stars. They helped make this event possible. Emily Goldstein, Marissa Volk-Binaku, and Jonathan Alexander. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. Hope you can stay and join us for lunch and continue the conversation with colleagues and friends throughout the region gathered here today. The food out there is labeled. There are 2 food stations. One is sort of closest on this wall, and there's one furthest back. DVRPC staff will be available out there to help answer any questions. Please feel free to continue to engage with our speakers and each other in line and as you eat, but please let our speakers get up and get some food too before you pounce on them. If you're interested in more on this topic, I'll draw your attention to upcoming Micromobility 2.0 workshop that's being hosted at Rutgers on March 22nd. More information should be available on the New Jersey Bicycle and Pedestrian Resource Center's website. Please also continue to engage with DVRPC on this topic, whether it's questions of funding or planning. We're here to help and we're here to engage. Thank you all for your participation. We hope this is really the beginning of a great conversation. There's a brief survey on your table. You can leave that brief survey on your table once you've filled it out. That'll really help us plot future directions. There's an AICP survey outside. You can turn that in out there. And then we also have a basket for name tags, and we'll recycle those for our next event here at DVRPC. Thank you all again. Have a great lunch. Have a great afternoon. Be well.
Good job. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.